Where you at, New Orleans? Hello, everybody, and welcome to the first ever live Dattitude podcast here on this Friday morning, episode number 86 for a September the 2nd, 2022. I'm along here at side Jeff Duncan, and if we're going to have this piece of it, this live piece, and then you will still be able to find the Dattitude podcast wherever you find your live podcast. Not your live podcast, wherever you find your podcast on Apple, Stitcher, Spotify, Google Play, all those good things. I'm going to do this every Friday morning here throughout the football season. It's going to be a fun little thing for the most part. I think we're going to have fun, especially if the Saints do well. Jeff Duncan, and speaking of that, welcoming in Jeff Duncan to the Dattitude podcast. How you doing, my friend?
Good morning, JD. I'm doing great, man. Football season is upon us. I got to watch a little college action last night, and it's starting to feel real, Love it.
Really, and you know what? They had some good games on last night. I tell you what, that Purdue game, I was not just because I bet on and lost by half a point. Not that I'm bitter or anything, but
brutal.
Yeah, it really was. That ending was brutal. But I mean, some great college football games on last night. West Virginia and Pitt, the first game for the Panthers without Kenny Pickett, and they did very well. So it's going to be an exciting season. And 1 week from today, we will be talking more about the Saints opener. But today we're going to talk about the rough week that the Saints had. Really, you kind of expect things like this to happen, Dunk, because, I mean, you can't go through this great preseason with all the excitement that's going on and then not expect something to happen that's not going to be exciting for everyone.
Well, yeah, they've been kind of quiet, right? All training camp. I'd remarked to some of my colleagues how the Saints were flying under the radar, really nationally. Not a lot of national reporters coming to town. That was very unusual. Usually we get Peter King and, all the big shots come to town. I think Ian Rappaport was the only national reporter I saw during the 4 weeks of camp. So the Saints were kind of flying on the radar, and then all of a sudden they make the big trade on cut day with Chauncey Gardner-Johnson, and then followed up by the news about Marcus Maye's arrest. So, yeah, back-to-back things. I didn't think it was necessarily all obviously the Marcus Maye news is troubling and bad news, but I'm not as down on the CJ Gardner trade as I think the fans are. He was a very popular player, but I don't think that's going to significantly impact the Saints at all defensively.
Well, Dunk, you go into that, and that's one of the things that I wanted to talk about a little bit. And I think what some people may not understand about the Chauncey Gardner-Johnson trade and basically giveaway is what it ends up turning out to be, is when the Saints are one of a few teams, in my opinion, that they don't handle locker room issues. They don't. It doesn't factor in with this team. They get rid of problems before they happen if they can. And in this case, I think the lingering contract situation with him was carrying on to the field and onto the practice field, and they realized that at some point it was going to be a problem. And the Saints are a team that they get rid of problems before they happen.
Yeah, no, you're spot on. And I think the most important thing for people to know is that wasn't the main reason they traded him. They wanted to get him under contract, and they were just far apart. So if they could have come to a deal, I think that what I'd been told by sources was the Saints were offering top nickel cornerback money, which is around a contract for an average of $8 million a year. That's not what CJ Gardner-Johnson and his representatives were seeking. They were seeking something about $4 million a year more than that, which is not nickel cornerback money. I understand where they're coming from. This is very similar almost to what happened with Jimmy Graham, where Jimmy Graham was trying to be paid as a wide receiver because receivers get paid more than tight ends. The Saints used him a lot like a receiver. So I kind of get both sides of it. But the fact is they were far apart, and the Saints had higher priorities, those being Eric McCoy and Marcus Davenport, two of their key players on each side of the line that are going to be significant deals. And they do not have a lot of cap room. They don't have any cap room next year. They're already $60 million over the cap. Right. So, we hear all the time about how the Saints are masters of the cap and all this, hype around it. And look, I get it. They've done a great job every year of trying to field a team that's competitive, but there are consequences to the kicking the can down the road. We've already seen it in the form of Teron Armstead leaving and Marcus Williams leaving and Trey Hendrickson leaving. And now you had to trade C.J. Gardner-Johnson because you couldn't get to a deal because you're cash strapped. So there are consequences. It just doesn't seem that way up front. But that was the real problem here. And then he wasn't reacting well to the fact that they didn't have a long-term deal. And that really kind of greased the skids.
If you want to ask us any questions or you have a comment for us, if you're not on Facebook, you can ask at Twitter at Jim Derry Jr. is where you would go bring your comment or your question. And I'll be glad to read it on the air. I have my Twitter up here. And we have our first question for you, Dunc. It's from Uncle Big Nick, and he wants to know, did Jeff Duncan actually read all those books that are behind you?
In full disclosure, no, I haven't read them all. I've got almost as big a stack on my nightstand near my bed that I'm like half. I'm notorious for starting and getting like a quarter or halfway through, then picking up another book. So I've got to learn to master that. I've tried to make a goal this year, Jim, of reading a book a week, and I've accomplished more book reading than I ever have this year, but I'm still struggling to meet that goal.
Well, when we get to this point of the season, that's a little tough. I mean,
Right.
It is really tough to read anything as we're about to go, and I'm sure you're going to be at the Dome on Sunday night at LSU and Florida State, and then the Saints prep for the Atlanta Falcons get started, and it's going to be really tough to do that.
No, I'm writing a book right now with Steve Gleason, so that's taking up almost all my free time away from my normal Times Picayune duties, which are during football season, as you know. I mean, we're pretty much 24/7. So got my hands full. I can squeeze in my reading time in snippets.
Well, I think sports writers are a little bit different from news reporters to me in the fact that I think news reporters read more than they write, or at least read as much as they write. Sports writers write way more than they read. I mean, it's just, maybe we're just not as intelligent as, and I'm not being facetious. I think we're just we don't have as much room up here as they do, which is okay.
When I was a beat writer, I read everything. Like everything about the Saints I could read, but I don't do that as much as a columnist because I'm spread around different teams I'm covering and stuff. But when I was the beat writer, I definitely read every word. And we used to be able to get access to the clip files. I don't know if people are aware of this, but like the Saints media relations department, every day they compile clip files of all the stories in the media that are written about the team that day. And it goes out to everybody in the building, all the coaches. I'm sure they don't get to all of it, but it's there if they want it every day.
Right.
And we used to get access to that. It used to have hard copy printout version of those. And so that was nice. You could just come into work at the Saints media center, sit down and read it all right there in the old school kind of printed out way. We don't get access to that anymore, so it makes it a little harder. You got to do it on your own digitally and set it up that way. But nevertheless, I don't have time for that either right now.
Ain't nobody got time for that. I mean, I just don't. Once the season starts, I can tell you from Monday to Sunday, if I have any break whatsoever and this house is quiet, I'm taking even if it's a little cat nap. I'm taking a little cat nap. I'm catching up as much as I can. That's what we do during the season. So because the weekends are just crazy. All right, let's get back to the Saints and stop talking about us. And we're going to have on in just a few minutes. I want to play a clip. It's about 16 minutes long, but it's interesting. For anybody who's followed, we have done team previews, all 32 of them. The 32nd team NFL team preview ran this morning on bet.nola.com. You can check it out there. You can check it out at nola.com /sports/Saints. It's everywhere. We've done all 32 of them. We finished with the Saints this morning, and we've had on at the end of every show, I give a little synopsis of what I think about whatever team I'm talking about and what their over-under is. And in this case, and I'll show this graphic, the over-under on the Saints, there you go. It's 8.5. If you want to bet on the Saints still, You can bet on the Saints to win more than 8.5 games or less than 8.5 games at Caesar Sportsbook and a lot of other books. That is the price at Caesar Sportsbook. You got to bet $130 to win 100 to go over 8.5. Now, just a couple of months ago, it was 7.5. So that goes to show you how much people have been betting on the Saints. In fact, division title was plus 300. Now it's plus 320. Super Bowl title a couple of months ago was plus 5,000. So if you think the Saints are going to win the Super Bowl and you want to put $10 on it today, if the Saints were to win the Super Bowl, you would win $400. You could do that at Caesar Sportsbook. And in fact, at Caesar Sportsbook, they have they also have if you're a new user, if you haven't got on there, Caesar Sportsbook, the official partner, betting odds partner of bet.nola.com. You can go on there and you get a free guaranteed bet. And what I mean by guaranteed bet is if you lose, you get whatever you bet on that first bet back in a free bet up to, I think, $1,250. You can check that out on bet.nola.com. So you can go bet on the Saints' future if you want, if that's what you want to do. But I want to talk about, and we're going to get to Adam in just a minute. Adam Chernoff was our professional handicapper, and he went through and dissected, and I gave my prediction on the Saints, as I did for all the other 31 teams, and he tells me whether I'm right or wrong, and he had some very interesting takes that I didn't have. So we're going to show that in just a moment. Again, it's about a 16-minute video, and I definitely think it's worth watching, or I wouldn't show the whole 16 minutes. So that's coming up in just a moment. But Dunc, I want to get your take on what you think about the Saints. And I think one of the things that scares me is you did a little poll of, I think, 29 media members a few weeks ago, or a couple weeks ago. And all 29 or 27 or however many it was,
27,
every single person said that the Saints are going over the 8.5 win total. And there is no way that every single person is right. So that scares the hell out of me. And if I didn't, I'm going by what I see, but it just scares me that everybody thinks the Saints are going over.
No, I feel 100% like you. That's never a good sign.
No.
But I do think there's a wider, to use a meteorological term, wider cone of uncertainty with this team than most of the teams I've covered, especially in the Drew Brees era. I think the floor for this team is much lower than some of the previous teams because there's a real precarious nature to a lot of the things, a lot of uncertainty, put it that way.
Yeah.
You got a new head coach, you got a new offensive coordinator. I know they're not new, but they are in new roles. Two new defensive coordinators, basically a new quarterback. I mean, Jameis Winston's been here, but he's still fairly new. There's just a lot of moving parts and new roles. And I think you're going to have a new mindset with a new head coach and a new culture. And I think that's still kind of playing itself out like most teams at this time of year. So I feel like the Saints are two of the key people they're relying on offensively, Jameis Winston and Michael Thomas. I mean, really haven't played very much in the preseason. We don't know really. I've heard good things about Michael Thomas's status, but is that going to hold up over the course of a season? Is Jameis Winston going to be able to hold up over the season? If not, does Andy Dalton still have it to lead this team? There's just a lot of things I think that have to go right. But if they do go right, I think this team can win 11, 12 games. I really do. I think they're talented enough to do that. But also know that every year, everything doesn't go right. I mean, it just doesn't. And we've already seen that here in the last week or so with Trevor Penning going down and now the arrest of Marcus Maye.
Well, the way I dissect most of these teams, and I did so with the Saints for sure, just as well, not just what they have personnel-wise, but as far as I like to go through the schedule. And you look at the Saints schedule, Dunc, and if you're watching this live, obviously, if you're listening on the podcast, you can't see this, but we'll try to go through some of it. Most of you know it anyway if you're listening to this. The Saints schedule to me, Dunc, they have got to get to 7 wins before they get to that November 20th game against the Rams if they're going to have any chance to win this division. Now, they might be able to go 6-4 or so if they're just going to go over their total and win people money, go over the 8.5. But to me, they have got to go 7-3 to get to the Rams because that stretch of Rams at San Francisco, at Tampa Bay before the extremely late bye week to me is just brutal.
Yeah, no, the fast start, I think this year, the schedule's kind of backloaded, middle and backloaded. I think the early first 5 games when the Saints go to London in week 4 and then come back and get Seattle, who I think is going to be terrible this year.
Yeah,
I think
absolutely
they're going to be
awful.
one of the worst teams in the league.
Agreed.
I think the Saints should do no worse than 4-1 in those first 5 games. 3-2, you can survive, but they have to at least have a winning record after 5 games. I don't see how they could recover from that, given how difficult that stretch is. I mean, once they get through Seattle, every team in that group for the next 2 months is a playoff team, except for Baltimore. And we know they are a playoff caliber team that had the only team in the league that really had more injuries than the Saints last year. So to me, that stretch is where you're going to have to just try and survive and maybe go 500. You have to build up a reservoir of wins before that.
Well, there's no question. And I mean, I think they also need to go 4-2 in the division, and whether that means sweeping Atlanta and Carolina or sweeping Atlanta and splitting with Carolina and Tampa Bay, whatever. I think you need to go at least 4-2 in this division to have a chance. And I've talked about it this week. I think Carolina could be the surprise. The Saints 2 months ago to me were the best value in the NFC as far as betting wise goes at 7.5 wins, and the odds to win the division at plus 500. But now I think it's the Panthers. I think the Panthers are going to be much improved. I think they're going to have a winning record if Christian McCaffrey stays healthy, if Baker Mayfield stays on the field, because he's such a major upgrade over Sam Darnold. And this defense, they were the second-ranked defense in the NFL last year. I think this is going to be a very surprise team, and I really like Carolina as far as future bets. I mean, you don't like them in your division. You don't want them to be as good as I think they're going to be, but I think Carolina is easily at least a 9-8 team.
Yeah, no, I think you're spot on there. I think that's a very difficult game for the Saints. They're going to have their home opener against Tom Brady and the Bucs. It's going to be an emotional game. We know that the dome will be lit. And then you go on the road to play Carolina, and they're packing. The Saints will be packing for their subsequent road trip over to London, because they're flying from Charlotte to London, which is going to be an exciting game. A lot of the players will have never been to London overseas. So it would be very easy to bask in the glory of maybe beating the Bucs, look ahead to the Vikings and going overseas to London and forget about the Panthers. And that's kind of what happened last year. The Saints beat Aaron Rodgers and Green Bay into the ground and then went to Carolina. I know there's some extenuating circumstances, but they still played terribly and got beat by a much worse team than they're going to face this year.
Uncle Big Nick says he doesn't like the Saints' chances on November 27th, but he's a little biased. He's a 49ers fan. 49ers fan living in New Orleans, it's just not right. I mean, he's born and raised New Orleanian, hates the Saints. His dad is a diehard black and gold, and somehow he became a 49ers fan. It's pretty disgusting.
I picked the Niners to win that game. I think that's a difficult one for the Saints. You're playing the Rams here. I think Jim Haslett once told me this a long time ago, and it is very accurate, and people don't think about it. When you play teams is so important. It's an overlooked factor in the NFL. When you get them, like, for instance, the Saints are getting the Bucs in week 2. That's a great time to get that team because they have all kinds of injuries to their offensive line right now. They'll eventually figure it out. They'll settle into roles, but you want to play them early.
And they start off on the road 2 straight weeks. So
Dallas.
Exactly. At Dallas on a Sunday night and then got to go back on the road at the Saints. That is not an easy spot for them. So I like the Saints there as well.
Yeah, so the Saints have to go to San Francisco after playing a big home game, the emotional game against the Rams, and that's a tough ask. If you beat the Rams, now you got to go on the road and play another quality team at their place all the way across the country. When you play teams, for instance, the Browns this year, if you get them without Deshaun Watson, that's one thing. You get them later in the year when they have him. I mean, they're a totally different team. So. I think that factor, along with injuries and then just playing good and bad breaks, kind of make up the difference between a lot of teams being 11-6 and maybe 7-9 in a given season.
For those of you watching live, you are watching the first ever live Dattitude podcast. It took us 86 episodes to try this. Duncan and I are going to do this every Friday during the football season as we roll along. Sometimes we'll have guests, and we're actually hoping to have a couple guests for our second live episode. I have not reached out to them. I want to keep it a surprise, so I don't want to go any further than that. But we'll see what happens next week. I want to get into the Adam Chernoff preview and his dissecting of the Saints. And Jeff, I want you to watch this, and I would like to get your take because I think it's great to have an outsider and someone who does this for a living, a professional handicapper. He's from Canada. He lives in Canada. He has no interest. He has no rooting interest, and we could say whatever we want because it makes our jobs easier if the Saints win. I mean, so we internally we secretly want the Saints to win, or sometimes not so secretly. So this is a complete outsider who is going to tell us what he thinks about the New Orleans Saints, if I can get it here very quickly. And here it is, Adam Chernoff in his commentary. I got a show. Well, we have made it, boys and girls. Day 32 of 32. And it's the one that most people here around where I'm broadcasting are most interested in. And that is the New Orleans Saints. And they have had quite an offseason. It's been an interesting change from Sean Payton now to Dennis Allen. Jameis Winston looks healthy. They've got supposedly most of their receiving core back. They draft Chris Olave. Of course, their other number one draft pick is now injured, but we'll talk about him in a minute. Adam Chernoff of Covers.com, as he has been for all 31 previous episodes, going to tell me whether he agrees with me or whether he doesn't agree with me or whether he's somewhere in the middle. But I have a hunch. We're going to agree, but at least
know where you're going. Yeah,
I think we're both going to have an opinion at least on this one. So let's start it with this. The Saints over-under at 8.5 currently, and you got to pay juice to get it. It has been steadily increasing. Adam, I will say this. I've been called Derry Downer many times throughout my career, so I will tell you when I think the Saints stink, but I don't understand with this lineup, this core, this group, and I get the change from Sean Payton to Dennis Allen, but to me, I don't understand why this number is so low. I will say that's not nearly the value there was a month and a half ago when it was 7.5, when I jumped all over it. But still, I think there's a little bit of a bargain at 8.5 and even more bargain at division title at plus 320.
Okay, so we did a podcast here in early April for the draft. Yes. And we talked about win totals, and the one that I left everyone with was Saints over 7.5. Now, I know everybody probably is still waiting to bet any win totals. So like you mentioned, you're looking at 8.5. It is a much bigger number. There's probably still value to go over. And another way that I could say to bet this would be to look at all your sportsbook offerings. And if you have a yes, no to win the division price, you can bet the no on Tampa Bay around plus 275. And that'll give you the option for an upstart Panthers team as well as the Saints. If you think Carolina has something there, we talked about it. We said we don't really know. It's a tricky one, but it kind of gives you that extra option for a very similar price to what you would be paying Saints division. It's an interesting output. Jim, we can go a lot of different directions here. I'll say that if this team was still coached by Sean Payton, this would probably be as much as I've liked the preseason future in a long time to go over, or for the Saints to have success, division, make the playoffs, however you want to approach it. With Dennis Allen stepping in, it kind of gives me hesitation because like we talked about with Tampa Bay, Dennis Allen as a defensive coordinator is amazing. Put him in that role. He should be one of the top defensive coordinators considered for any team if we were starting the league fresh. He is brilliant. What is he going to look like as a head coach with added responsibility? We don't know. That's really the big concern here for the Saints. The reason that I'm willing to bet on the Saints is the only team with that defensive head coach is because we know very certainly that a lot of the offense is going to be pushed aside and it's going to be left to Pete Carmichael because he has been there for almost 2 decades. And there's been instances where Peyton has been away from the team, where Carmichael has stepped in and run the offense to perfection. Some of the best stretches in Drew Brees' career were with Carmichael taking the place of Sean Payton, the suspension, the leg injury, whatever it might be. There's proven success that Carmichael can have with this team. Where I think it's really interesting is last year, it's tough to get a lot from what the Saints did. They played 4 different quarterbacks. They lost the second most games to injury on offense. This team was beat up, banged up, and they still put up really good numbers. The price point this year is actually lower than where they finished a year ago. I really like Winston in this offense, especially with Michael Thomas coming back, but the speed that Olave has. The one thing that's going to make the Saints team really different from what they were a year ago is, as much as you might dislike Jameis Winston, one thing that he does and is willing to do is throw the ball downfield with reckless abandon. That sounds like a bad thing, but for the Saints, with Kamara out of the backfield in this offensive line, space and defenses needing to respect things downfield is what this team desperately needs, and something they have not had, even going back into the last couple of years of Breeze's career when his arm strength was dwindling. Now that that's there, this really gives this team a lot of options to run the offense how they want to. And I think you add Jarvis Landry in, and this trio of guys is the best set of weapons the Saints have had at wide receiver for a very long time. We're talking 5-10 seasons. Like, this is as good as they've had. So I'm really intrigued how that looks with the deep ball and what that does for the guys out of the backfield behind this O-line. This is a really good football team that is somewhat flying under the radar. But like you mentioned, professionals love this team. I really like it a lot too.
And Marcus Callaway as a number 4. Traquan Smith is a 4/5. I mean,
yeah.
It's crazy to go from the complete lack of depth at wide receiver last year to more depth, and they're going to have to make some tough cuts today, as we record this, today or tomorrow. And they're going to make some tough cuts, and it will be interesting to see. I want to get your opinion on, when you look at the offense, there are definitely some potential problems that I wonder how handicappers take a look at. It's looking more and more like Alvin Kamara will not be suspended this season, that it will happen in the offseason. But it's still a possibility that it could happen. You got Michael Thomas. He's coming off the foot injury, and now he's having issues with his hamstring. You look at left tackle, number 1 pick, Trevor Penning was fighting with James Hurst, who's also banged up, and we don't know who's going to play left tackle in week 1. Do these things enter your mind? And I know probably more in a look-ahead line type thing they might, but as far as a future number and trying to get value in a division title, do those things enter your mind / bother you?
Okay, so from a handicapping perspective, obviously if Thomas is not on the field and Kamara gets suspended, that's going to change things pretty drastically for the Saints. The left tackle situation is a weird one. Again, like you said, we still don't know, but that's negated somewhat by Pete McCoy, Ruiz, and Ramczyk being just one of the best O-lines there is. So that's negated a bit. But obviously at the skill position players, those are always worth more. If Thomas and Kamara are not on the field, that's going to make this team close to, I would say, a win worse is a fair number to think about it long-term, week to week. That's probably 2 points total combined in the point spread. What I will say from just Saints fans watching this and how you kind of want to think about this, Michael Thomas is no longer a number 1 receiver. So if you have that expectation going into 2022 in your mind for how dominant he was 2018-19, just taper that off, because he's not that guy anymore. The ankle injury and what that does to the interior of the leg and what that does for route running, he'll never be the same guy. So take a step back on that. And what I would really be hoping for is, like you mentioned, you get some more emergence from, depending how they cut it, Callaway or Smith as that extra guy, but you really need to hope that Olave becomes this dominant downfield speed receiver, because what that will do is demand extra coverage from defenses. And when you think about Michael Thomas, now that his route running is negated, if you have some extra emphasis needed elsewhere, that's going to take the burden off, and it's still going to allow him and his elite hands to be able to really make an impact within this offense. And so you really need to be watching for that. Landry is going to be fine no matter where he's put. He's going to be really good at playing off of both of these guys. And so he's going to be that dominant number 2, but you really need Olave to step in. But just have the expectations for Thomas tapered off and just really watch for early on how this team is able to stretch the field, because that's going to be the big tell for this offense.
You see one big difference between the Falcons and the Saints. I mean, and their numbers only 3.5 wins different. Drake London, who they drafted in the first round, is clearly their number 1 receiver. Now, Kyle Pitts is probably the number 1 target. Yeah. Their number 1 receiver is Drake London. Here, Chris Olave is wide receiver number 3 for this offense, and they already have in my mind, a top 3 or 4 defense. But before I ask you about the defense real quick, last year you talk about the 4 different quarterbacks for the Saints, and obviously that's a lot about what Saints fans, and they don't want to see Ian Book on the field. How much does it help you, the fact this year that with Jameis Winston as the starter, even though you worry about him, whether he's going to stay healthy or not, to get Andy Dalton in there, to me, a top 5 backup quarterback, how much that could help this team?
It's definitely relief, but you said it right. You want Jameis on the field. You want him healthy, because the most valuable thing that you can have in 2022 in the NFL is a QB that can push the ball downfield. And trust me, as Saints fans watching this, variance is going to follow Jameis Winston anywhere that he goes. You're going to be frustrated with a lot of decisions that he makes, but you have to understand that he is very, very, very different from what you've been accustomed to with the precision passing of Drew Brees for 2 decades. Last year, you didn't get to see it in full. You are going to get some huge plays, and you are going to get some huge mistakes, but that is what you want in 2022 when you're not dealing with some of the top 5 or 6 elite quarterbacks. So you want Jameis healthy, you want him on the field, and you want that deep ball to work, because that is where this Saints offense can exceed the ceiling that's being put on it.
Handicappers love uncertainty with massive potential. I mean, I wasn't betting back in the day, but I would imagine handicappers loved Brett Favre.
I mean, and again, it was his end of the career in the late 2000s was right when I got started, but you're exactly right. When there's more uncertainty, there's more chance of the odds being mispriced. And that's exactly what you're looking for. And that's what makes a lot of the NFL so difficult to bet, is there's a lot of things that are known and the expectations fall within a narrow window. Jameis Winston could be a 5,000-yard passer with 45 touchdowns and be incredible, or he could be benched by week 8 and you get Andy Dalton because Winston's thrown 15 interceptions. But that is what makes the team so exciting to bet on, because that upside with Jameis is enormous. But with that comes a massive floor. But we're dealing with the team that's priced at 8.5 that could legitimately win 11 games, could also win 5 games if it goes wrong. So that's what makes it so exciting as a bettor when you're looking at the Saints.
I bet $20 on Jameis to be the league MVP at 150 to 1. Good deal.
I think so, and I would honestly also bet on him to lead the league in interceptions if you're going to go that far.
That
true. Doesn't mean the Saints are going to be a terrible football team, but if Carmichael lets him throw, we saw him throw 33 touchdowns and 33 INTs and lead the league in passing for the Bucs. And I think the difference is the Saints are going to be leading a lot more than that Bucs team was.
Right.
But I mean, it's not a stretch to think that Jameis is going to get near 20 INTs, but he might have a whole lot more touchdowns too, because that's just what he brings to this team overall. So it's nothing wrong with taking the MVP shot, but I don't think there's anything wrong going the other way, because this is going to be an offense with just an enormous amount of variance with him under center.
Lastly, I thank you for doing the extended preview here with our team, our local team, and the Saints. And defensive rank last year of 7. And I honestly think, Adam, with this, if this D-line stays healthy and the defensive backfield stays healthy and Demario Davis stays healthy, all ifs, of course, but I think 7's the floor for this defense. I mean, and I think there's going to be a chance to, even though as good as the Saints offense looks on paper, I think you have plenty of chances. I think their overs may be inflated a little bit, and you might be able to get some good prices on some unders throughout the season.
7 is the floor is ambitious. I'm not super far off from that. I think it'll rank very close to the same. I would say that that's kind of, if you can have a defense that ranks 7th again, despite the schedule being pretty tough, that will give this offense all the opportunity that it needs to get into the playoffs. And so if you're exceeding 7th with this defense and everyone on the offense for the most part is able to stay healthy, that's going to put the Saints in a very good situation. We'll see if Lattimore can tighten up within the red zone. That would go a very long way against top wide receivers. But as you mentioned up front, this is a very good defense that's going to need some new pieces in the secondary to contribute. If they finish 7th, we'll be looking in January of this being a playoff team for sure.
And the fact that they've had Tampa Bay's number division title at plus 320, we kind of touched on it, but I assume you like that value. It was 500. It was better when it was 500, but 320 still a value.
Honestly, Jim, at this point, if you can find the no on the Bucs to win, you're not looking at a massive difference in price at plus 275 versus plus 325 for the Saints only. If you think the Bucs are going to struggle and everything we talked about in the preview yesterday is going to come to fruition, there's no, I think plus 275 is the better bet than plus 325.
Makes sense.
Because there's so much uncertainty about the Panthers that take that while you can.
Best international game of the year is going to be Saints and Vikings in London. You talked about it a few weeks ago. I think the Vikings and the Saints are both the best values in the NFC, and I think we kind of agree on that. Right?
They're my two best bets for teams within the NFC. Yes,
mine too, and I think we're really looking forward to that. I think that game in Week 5, I believe, is going to tell us a whole lot. And I want to thank you, Adam Chernoff, for coming with us throughout the whole ride. It has been a lot of fun, and we made it through all 32. We are going to talk to you soon during the football future. I'm sure when we get to Dattitude, doing it live every Friday, we're going to have you on at some point in the football future. We wish you nothing but success going forward. I'm going to miss talking to you every week.
Hey, we'll still have to keep in touch, obviously, during the season, but thanks for all the previews, and this is going to be a very fun season.
Adam Chernoff, covers.com. Make sure you check him out and check out covers.com. Lots going on there. And thank you for joining us throughout this ride of 32 teams, team preview. It's time to get to real football, boys and girls.
Sure is.
Well, Dunc, I thought that was an interesting take, especially when he talked about the part about Jameis Winston. I thought, to me, that was the most interesting part of it all. And why bettors love to bet on the Saints. I mean, he's right. Jameis Winston could be the guy we saw for those first 7 weeks, the guy who threw 14 touchdowns against 3 interceptions. And so this year, I mean, he could throw for 5,000 yards. He could throw for 30 touchdowns. But we've seen him throw 30 interceptions in a season. So that's what makes this team interesting to play if you're outside of the Saints.
Yeah, no, I thought he had some really great takes, obviously well-informed takes. I do think that this team, I think the one thing that's missing in that commentary is the fact that Dennis Allen is the head coach now.
Yeah.
And I think that influence coming from the defensive side of the ball is going to be greater than people predict. What I mean by that, JD, is, I think Jameis Winston knows. I think Dennis Allen knows. I think Pete Carmichael knows this team is a defensive-oriented team, and they have an elite defense. I believe, like you, the 7th is just a statistical metric. Everything else, if you look at advanced defensive metrics, the Saints are in the top 3. You can make an argument they could be number 1 in overall in DVOA. So this is an elite defense, and Dennis Allen's going to lean on that. They're not going to throw the ball all over the yard. The last thing he wants to do is create more turnovers. So I don't think that's going to be the Jameis Winston we see this year. I think it's going to be a lot like the guy we saw early last year, even with added weapons. Now, I think they'll be better offensively, but I think stylistically they are going to be a lot more – there are going to be a lot of games in the low 20s because this team is so good defensively they don't have to throw it all over the yard. But they're going to get into a game here or there where they do get in a shootout, and they now have the weapons to where they can win a game like that, I think. But that's not going to be how they want to approach most games.
Dunc, the premise of this show to start was dissecting the Saints' rough week. And, kind of what you said leads me into my question for you is, I think the injury to Trevor Penning, although I think Chris Olave is probably more important overall this team, especially maybe for the long-term future. But Trevor Penning's injury to me hurts this team more than if Chris Olave were to get hurt, because we still don't know where James Hurst is. He's probably going to play in week 1, but he's probably going to play banged up a little bit. But just to take that depth at a position that is, to me, it's the second most important position on the team behind quarterback. And to go into your season, you thought you were going to have 2 really good left tackles, and now you only have 1, and it's a guy that really is kind of versatile and plays all over the place. So how much does losing Trevor Penning, in your mind, hurt this team?
Well, I think it was a blow, and because Trevor Penning was really coming on. You could see the development and the improvement, and I think he was going to end up winning the starting job. It was just a matter of time till he became the starting left tackle. But the Saints are very confident in James Hurst. People I talked to after Penning went down, they do not lose sleep about the left tackle position right now. I mean, every team in the league would be in trouble if you lost your top 2 left tackles. So, I mean, you just can't go into a season worried that way. I think the Saints would probably have to move somebody over to left tackle if Penning went down. Maybe Pete, maybe Ramczyk, flop him over, put Landon Young at right tackle. That might be the way they go. They've got some options if Hurst went down. But Hurst is fine. He was in the locker room the other day. We talked to him. They're just being cautious with him. Everything with the Saints right now is, let's get to game 1 at 100, as close to 100% healthy as we can. That's why you haven't seen Mike Thomas. That's why you haven't seen Hurst. That's why you haven't seen Marshawn Lattimore. But they're all going to be there in week 1, so I wouldn't worry about that. It's a matter of, can they long-term stay healthy with some of these key positions?
First ever live Dattitude, episode number 86 here. We have you on Facebook. We're on Twitter. We're going to try to get to YouTube the next time we do this. Jeff, Duncan, and I are going to be together every Friday at 9:15 a.m. live. And then when I'm done here, I'll go and record my monologue and post it on every major podcast platform like I've done for the first 85 episodes of the show. And I thank everyone out there for it growing as it has. And it really has grown, and a lot of it has to do with you, Dunc. I appreciate that. Before I let you go, I do want to touch on the defense. You touched on Marcus Maye. We don't know what's going to happen now with this arrest, these things. What a mess. He's already suspended for the first part of the season anyway. We don't know what's going to happen with that. But to me, we're talking about it on the Bayou Bet show on Thursday. Secondary was a major strength of this team. How much does losing Marcus Maye, we don't know for how long now, and with GJ gone, is that now a weakness on this team?
No, not at all. I don't think it's going to have a major impact at all. They've got good depth there. I think the way Justin Evans played this camp has to give everyone a lot of confidence. I know Dennis Allen mentioned him by name the other day, how well he's played. You've got Bradley Roby has stepped up as the third corner. He can play in the nickel role. They'll be just fine there. PJ Williams is a very versatile player, an experienced player. I don't think it's going to have a major – Marcus Maye is a very good player, don't get me wrong. But if he has to sit for 2 to 4 games or whatever it is, they'll survive just fine because of the quality depth they have. I think where it hurts you more is the fact that you were counting on him and Tyrann Mathieu to be – your 2 high safeties back there, interchangeable parts to some degree, and they need reps together. And now that could get derailed. I don't know necessarily though, JD, if it's anything going to happen right off the bat. These things tend to take a while to play out. The way the NFL works, they don't usually weigh in with discipline until the criminal process, legal process, is played out. That's been the case with his DUI as well. So I don't know if it's going to have an impact right away. This thing could end up getting delayed and postponed, and we don't see this taking effect till midseason or even later.
All right. Finally, well, two things real quick before we let you go, so we don't want this show to be too long here, especially our first live show. You said you thought the Saints could win 11 or 12 games. I know, again, it scares the bejesus out of me that every media mogul in this area thinks that the Saints are going to win either. I think the lowest I saw was 9. Where do you stand on the Saints right now? What is your official prediction as we are just now, 9 days before the start of the regular season? Where do you stand, and what is the Saints' final record, and do they make the playoffs?
Well, I picked 11-6. A little spoiler alert: my crystal ball column will come out probably in a few days. 11-6. I think they're going to win the division. Matter of fact, my first column for NOLA Bets was the fact that I think the best bet in the NFL this year is the under on the Bucs. I think they're 11.5. That seems extraordinarily high to me, JD. They've only won 12 games in a season. The Bucs franchise twice in their history, and one of them was last year. Now you're saying they're going to do it back to back. I just think some things are going to go wrong. Some things have already gone wrong for the Bucs. So I like the Saints. I think a great bet would be the Saints to win the division. But having said that, that's contingent upon really 3 things for me, and they're all involving good health, and that is Jameis Winston, Michael Thomas, and the one that no one really talks about, I've written about him already, is Marcus Davenport. Marcus Davenport is critical to this season. He's a breakout candidate. He's the best, most dominant defensive player they have, and he needs to stay healthy. It's a contract year for him. He is a difference maker. He has a domino effect on the rest of the defensive line. At this stage of Cam Jordan's career, he's not that force he was. I know he had a lot of sacks last year, but if you look, his pressures dropped off, his hurries, his tackle, everything else dropped off. And that's natural. He's in his early 30s. I mean, he's probably got 2 more seasons at most. Marcus Davenport has to be a game changer, and he already is having issues with the shoulder, which you have to have at defensive end. So to me, he's critical for this defense. You talked earlier, 7 is the floor. For them to be elite top 5, they've got to have Davenport on the field. So those 3 things, I think if they all stay healthy, I think the Saints are a playoff team.
Yeah, I've got them at 10-7. I had them at 10-7 last year. It was off by a win. I think, obviously, with the way the playoffs go now, I think 10-7 is you go 10-7, you're going to make the playoffs. 9-8 might get you in, but to be safe, 10-7 is the floor where you need to be, and I think they will be. I don't think they're going to win the division. I still think Tampa Bay is going to win this division. Although it wouldn't surprise me if either the Saints or the Panthers end up winning this division. I also, like you, Dunc, I like the Tampa Bay under as well, 11.5, because I think 11 is their ceiling.
Yeah, if you look at 6 is a good year.
Yeah, it is. It's a very good year, and
then you win your bet if they go 11-6. I like those odds. We talked earlier. Look at their opening 4 games. They go to Dallas, to New Orleans. They come back home. They get the Packers and the Chiefs.
Kansas City.
I mean, they could start 1-3. They could be 0-4. I mean, easily.
Would that be a story if they were 0-4?
And then it's hard to dig out of a hole like that. So
it really is.
I think they are very vulnerable. The one thing that I think everyone's focusing on the injuries to the offensive line. If you're going to have those kind of things happen to you, you want a quarterback like Tom Brady because he can compensate. He, like Drew Brees, they're going through the progressions before they even get to the line of scrimmage. They know where they're going with the ball. So for a guy like him, he can compensate, but they're still going to have an effect on the running game. And he's not a scrambler, as we all know at this stage, especially. That defense is legit, but I just think it's very precarious right now in Tampa.
Well, and Dunk, they also have had changes on the offensive line and now have lost Tristan Wirfs for a little bit. So, I mean, that's going to be a big problem for them, especially in the early part of this season. And I love Leonard Fournette, covered him in high school, but he's going to get hurt at some point in the season. Mike Evans is going to get hurt at some point in the season. Chris Godwin's already banged up. Russell Gage already banged up. So, I mean, this team is already having their issues on offense before they even get into the season. And Tom Brady, to me, not just because he's 45 years old, but he just doesn't look as interested as he normally is. We'll see what happens with the defensive coordinator as a head coach.
Yeah, I was going to bring that up. You got the uncertainty of Todd Bowles, and then you had Brady missing 10 days.
Exactly.
There's just a lot of things. They feel like a club that's peaked to me. They won the Super Bowl. They came back, won 13 games, kind of kept the status quo. To me, their needle's pointing down. I think they'll still be good, but I think that bet, if I had to bet my life on something this year, it would be on that under.
It's a good thing we don't go to the pirate ship until December the 4th, because they're not going to love you over there. I mean, your food is not going to. You better be careful of what you eat in that press box up there.
They have one of the best spreads in the NFL. We'll say that. In Tampa's defense, the one thing they do have over New Orleans is their game day spread in the press boxes.
Well, I have never been there, and I was told that I'm going to go to at least one road game this year. So I'm hoping that's it, actually.
That's a good one.
My dad lives about 80 miles from there, so maybe I'll make the drive and go see my dad, who just turned 80 last week. Last question. We never touched on LSU, but big LSU-Florida State game on Sunday. I call this a must-win for the Tigers. It is the most important non-conference game this team has played in many years. Obviously, SEC games are more important anyway, and they always are. But to me, if this team is going to have any chance to be decent this year and get to 7 or 8 wins and play in a decent bowl game, they have got to beat Florida State. They have got to set the tone for the season, because, quite frankly, the SEC schedule is brutal, and I don't see them winning more than 2 or 3 games in SEC play. They have got to win on Sunday. I think they will. What do you think?
Yeah, I've got them winning this game, but it's one of those dicey 50-50 kind of games on the schedule that you mentioned. I mean, there's a bunch of them on this year's roster, like, the Auburn game, Ole Miss. These games could go either way, and those are the ones that make or break your season. We talked about the cone of uncertainty with the Saints. I think there's a huge cone of uncertainty with the LSU. I don't know what to expect. Got new offensive systems on both the offensive, defensive systems, new coordinators, a whole new culture, a new head coach. The thing that gave me pause, I was talking to one of our old colleagues, Brody Miller, about this recently. The 2-deep roster for LSU has, I think last time I looked, 12 players from the transfer portal in it. Those guys are going to be playing. You're leaning on 12 Now, I know that's today's modern game, but it also is a reflection of where the program was when Brian Kelly took it over. They had to bring in 12 transfers, and they're either starting or backups. At the SEC elite level, that's not the case. You kind of cherry pick those guys to fill in a roster spot, not 12 of them.
Right.
To me, that's a sign of the program had really reached a bottoming out point under Ed Ogeron, and it's going to take a little while to get back the numbers, because that's what at the elite college level, it's a numbers game, and the Alabamas and Georgias of the world are not leaning that heavily on newcomers to come in. And the offensive line in particular, JD, is almost all newcomers. And that's going to take a little while to take effect. So I think this is a dangerous game, because Florida State got a game under its belt, probably didn't show anything because they were saving it for LSU. And they're going to have a lot of fans here. It's an easy trip over from Tallahassee. So I think this game is dangerous, but LSU still has 3 projected first-round draft picks on their roster. So they've got elite talent. They need more depth, and I think that will come into play later this season.
Over under 7 wins. Do they go over? Do they go under? Or do they push?
I picked them to go 8-4, so I'm a little optimistic.
That is very optimistic.
That's really optimistic. I think 7 is probably realistic.
I think 7 is the ceiling. I hope I'm wrong. With a new quarterback, and like you say, I think this is, and it's okay. It's okay that this is a rebuilding year. It really is. There's nothing wrong with that. I mean, most major they can't all be Alabama, and even Clemson last year went through a semi-rebuilding year. Every team except Alabama goes through it, and it's okay. So just enjoy what you got and enjoy the game Sunday, and I'm assuming I'll see you there.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it. I think the dome's going to be packed, and it should be a great environment. And it's just amazing to me that we have LSU, Florida State, and neither one of them is ranked. But they both have such brand power in college football. In my opinion, 2 of the best home field experiences in college football. Yet we're going to be here in the Dome, in one of the iconic stadiums in all sports.
Well, I want to say thanks again for helping me make this a reality. I've been thinking about doing a live show since we started this last September. I think this is the perfect venue. I think we're going to have a lot of fun with it. Sometimes we're going to have guests. A lot of times we're not going to have guests. It's just going to be you and I talking about the game that's to come. So obviously next week we'll be talking in depth about the Saints and the Falcons coming up. I'm hoping to have a surprise. I'm hoping to have a couple guests on surprise. I have not talked to them yet. We'll see. But again, I think this is going to be a fun ride doing this live, and we'll see where it takes us, Jeff Duncan.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it. Once we get into the games, man, we'll have a lot to talk about, rehashing the previous game and looking forward to the weekend game ahead. And there's going to be no shortage of compelling storylines. This team, I think, has generated a ton of interest, JD. I mean, people are really excited about this season, and rightfully so, but there's a lot of uncertainty, and I think that leads to a lot of compelling storylines during the season. It's going to be interesting no matter how it plays out.
There's no question. So, and during the week, if you want to send a question to either myself or Jeff Duncan or do it during the live show, either way, I am at Jim Derry Jr. on Twitter. Jeff Duncan is at Jeff Duncan _ on Twitter. I am at jdderry@theadvocate.com is my email. Jeff Duncan at jduncan@theadvocate.com. We are happy to take your questions. If you want to make a comment, any of those things, we're live on Facebook. We're live on Twitter. I'm hoping that we'll be live on YouTube. We're working on that. It's coming. And until next Friday, we will talk to you then, Dunc, and have a good week.
You too, buddy. See you next week.
All right, everybody, that is it for the live broadcast portion of this show. Again, this will be on our regular podcast platforms with my monologue and wrap-up coming up, all major platforms, somewhere around 11 a.m., 11:15 a.m. this morning. That'll do it for Dattitude episode number 86, the live show. We will see you next Thursday. We're going to have a Dattitude with Uncle Big Nick as we do our predictions for the week, and then Jeff Duncan next Friday, September the 9th, for episode 88. We'll see you then. I'm Jim Derry. He's Jeff Duncan. Talk to you soon.